Boker Tov. We'll pick up where we left off yesterday on Daf Mem Ches, and we got up to Omar Rava. So the question is whether or not the Torah recognizes a Kinyan Ma'os, which is the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan, or according to Reish Lakish, on the other hand, the Torah recognizes only a Kinyan Mashicha. And Rava says, Kra umasnisa misayeh Reish Lakish. We can bring both support from the Torah, from the Pasuk, as well as from a Brisa. So for today, we're going to go into Rava's proof to support Reish Lakish in both the Kra and the Masnisa and the Brisa. So from the Pasuk, it says the following. The kichesh ba miso, the pikadon, o besumes yad, o begezel, o oshak es amiso. So now we're going to go through each phrase in this pasuk. Now the subject of this pasuk is a case of a person who took a false oath to deny a certain monetary obligation. And for this oath, when we find out the truth that he really owes this money, number one, obviously he has to return the keren. Secondly, he has to add a chomesh. And thirdly, he has to bring a karban asham gzelos. Now, what's common to all these cases that we're about to learn is that we're dealing with a denial that was supported by a false oath, a denial on a specific physical object. So if we take, for example, the case of Pikadon, then the mafkid had deposited a specific object in the hands of the shomer, the nifkad, and he took a shvur that he didn't receive this object. But now we have to know what is tsumes yad. Now, the phrase tsumes yad means something that was given, money that was given from one hand to the other. That's called a loan or a halva. But in the case of a loan, there's no specific object that has to be returned to its owner, its proper owner, the malvan. And therefore, the question is, why would a loan incur a chiyuv of Hasham Gzelos? Rav Chisda explains this. Kigon sheyiched lo kli lahalva also. The love had designated a certain specific kli as a collateral, as a mashkan, which means that he's telling the malva that in event that I default on this loan, you could collect this utensil. But the utensil was never given from the love over to the malva. So it's still in the lova's possession. The lova took a shvua to the effect that he doesn't have any collateral in his hands. He doesn't have any loan for that matter. And then we get to the next case in the pasuk, which is Ashak. Now, Ashak deals with the case of an employer and an employee. And the employer was meant to pay wages, and he did not pay up his wages to his employers or his employer. And then, when forced to take an oath to that effect, he took such a false oath as if he paid up his wages, but he didn't really pay up his wages. Now, once again, it would seem to be an abstract chov rather than a shvua on a specific be'en, a specific object. But again, Amar Rav Chisda Kagon Sheyiched Lo Kli Liyoshko, that the balabayis who hired these workers had specified a particular kli, a specific object, and he had designated as collateral, as a mashkon, for the wages that he owes to the poel. But once again, this mashkon was not handed over to the workers. It was maintained. It was kept in the possession of the balabayis, and therefore there's going to be a shvua, a false shvua on a specific object, and that engenders a chiyuv asham gzelos. Okay. Now Rava is going to prove the sheet of Reish Lakish. He says the following: V'chiahadre kra ksiv. If you take a look at the psukim, you'll see that the Torah repeats itself. That's called a hadre kra. And the Torah once again goes through the whole list of cases in which the person who took the shvua sheker now has to return the object that he received once the truth comes out. But in this list, which tells you when he's going to be chayav a korban osham, one case from the entire list was omitted by the Torah. And it says, V'haya ki yechta v'yashem v'yeshivas hagzela asher gazal o es ha'oshek asher oshak es ha'pikadon asher hifkid ito. So we have 3 out of the 4 cases that were listed in the original psukim and are repeated in the second series of psukim, where the Torah says that once we find out that he took this false oath and he has to repay the object and replace it, and then he has to bring a korban osham, 1 out of the 4 cases that was originally enumerated was omitted. That's the case of the loan, which is called sumas yad. Lo ahadre, the Torah didn't repeat itself. My timer. So Rava comes up with his explanation as to why the Torah didn't repeat itself with regard to a loan. Lav mishum demachasre meshicha. When the love designated an object as a mashkon, as a collateral for the chov, the malve, who's meant to acquire ownership over the mashkon, did not implement a meshicha because, as we said earlier, the object, the utensil, remained in the possession of the lover. And if that be the case, if there was no meshicha, then we understand that the lover does not owe the malva any specific object, even though verbally he had designated as a mashkon, and perhaps there was such an agreement between the lov and the malva that this particular object would guarantee the loan, but nevertheless, the malva never made a kinyan on the mashkon. He did not implement a meshicha. And therefore, what we're left with is that the lova owes the malva a loan, but it's not appropriate for this list of cases where you chayav an asham, because the asham cases are contingent on the fact that there's a specific object that belonged to Reuven, and Shimon took a shvua to deny Reuven's ownership over that object. The Gemara says, wait a second. You're going to tell me that the Torah omitted sumas yad? what about the case of Oshek Esamito? You remember that when we discuss Oshek Esamito, which means that he withheld wages to be paid to the workers, Rav Chizda said it was a case where the Balabayas, the employer, had designated an object as collateral, as to guarantee the payment of the wages, but he never actually took that object out of his domain, and there was never a haknah to the workers, to the Poland. And yet the Torah does repeat the case of Oshak Es Hamito. Omalei Rav Papa Rava, Ema me Oshak hu the Hadar Kra. How can it be that the Torah, in the case of the loan, did not repeat itself, but yet the Torah, in the case of Oshak Es Amito, does repeat itself? And in both cases, we saw that Rav Chizda has to interpret it as a case of there was a yichud kli, whether it was, again, the yichud kli in the first case of a loan as a mashkan, or a yichud kli as a mashkan in the second case of Oshak as Hamito with the wages and the balabayas. So Rav answers, Hachamay Askinon, Kigon Shenitolo Mimenu V'chazo V'fkidu Etzlo. What happened was that the employer, right, the balabayas, handed over that collateral, that utensil to those who earned their wages. They made a kinyan meshicha, and then after their wages were paid, they returned the mashkon to the hands of the balabayas, the employer, and then for the second day, the following day of wages of work, they didn't get it back, but they had already made a kinyan. So Gemara says, Hainu Pikadon. Well, then, in that sense, when the workers return the object to the hands of the employer, that's like giving a deposit over to a shomer. Like, hold on to this for me. Well, that's in the pasuk. So why would the pasuk have both Pikadon and Oshak Es Hamito when they're identical cases? And the Gemara says, Trey Gavni Pikadon. I mean, it's just two different types of cases of putting a deposit in the hands of a shomer. One is a straight classic case of a deposit, and the other is this very unusual case where the wages took the collateral and then they they replaced it and gave it back to the balabas. Ihachi tzumas yad nami lahadre. The look make a go chenitolo emenu v'chaza v'fkido etzlo. Why didn't the Torah repeat itself in the case of a loan, which we said was tzumas yad was a loan, and the Torah could have said that there's a chi of carbon asham when the lova denies the loan and takes a shua sheker, because the collateral was given over to the hands of the malva. He made a kinyan meshicha, and then he redeposited it in the hands of the lova, which is exactly consistent with the case of Oshak Es Hamito in wages. So the Gemara says, "Iyahadri kra lo tiyuvta v'lo siyat." If the Torah would have repeated the case of Tzumas Yad, then we wouldn't know one way or the other what was the kinyan of the malveh on this mashkot. Was it through Mos, according to Rabbi Yochanan, or was it through Mashicha supporting Reish Lakish? So we would have no proof one way or the other. But Hash now, the Lo Hadri Kra, the Torah did not repeat itself with regard to Tzumas Yad, meaning alone. Is Kra Misayele, the Pasuk really supports Reish Lakish. And the reason why there's no carbon asham and the Torah didn't repeat itself in the case of alone, it's because the Malva had never made a Maisa Mashiach, a Maisa Kinyan on the Mashka. Gemara now raised the following question: Tzumas Yad Lo Hadri Kra. Is it really so that with regard to alone, the Torah did not repeat itself? V'Tanya, we have a brisa. Omer Rabbi Shimon minayin litenes omer l'mayla l'mata. Titzivo mikol asher yishava olav l'sheker. The Torah, when it repeated the entire list for the purpose of Chiyuv Karban Asham, the Torah didn't really omit anything, and Tzumas Yad was included in the ribui of Mikol Asher Yishav, on anything that he took a false oath. V'yomer Rav Nachman Omer Rabba Baravu Omer Rav L'Rabba Tzumas Yad L'Yishavon. So the Torah wrote it in that way to include Tzumas Yad. So Tzumas Yad is in fact included in. And the Gemara says that Rava still feels he has a proof to support Reish Lakish about Kinyan Mashicha because Behedja Mi'alo Hadri Kra, the Torah did not explicitly mention Tzumas Yad and repeat it the second time around in order to, so to speak, allude to the fact that there was no Mashicha and therefore the Malva did not acquire ownership over the mashka. So we're halfway through Rava now, in the sense that Rava brought a proof from the Kra from the Pasuk to support Reish Lakish regarding Kinyan Mashiach. And keep in mind that at the end of the day, we're going to paskin against Reish Lakish. We're going to paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, despite the proofs that Rava adduces. It could be Rava himself changed his mind, because Lamaisa, it's a very weak proof. Masnisa Minolan. What was the brisa that Rava referred to when he said, I have a brisa to support Reish Lakish? The Sanya. Nisana lebalon ma. We're now learning the laws of Me'ilah, which means that you misappropriate monies, coins that belong to Hegdish. Kedushas Domin. Now, there's somebody called a balon, right? He's in charge of managing the local bathhouse. And what you do is you pay him a kind of a down payment for rights to use the bathhouse. And in this case, what monies were passed on to the balon by the bather? These were monies of Hegdish. And therefore, by misappropriating the monies of Hegdish, he who paid the balon has violated the Isur Me'ilah. He was Moel Behegdish. The Omar Rav, Dafka balon. Why is this case in the Brisa focused on a balon? I mean, Lamaisa could have been any number of different cases where you used money of Hegdish for a payment. And the answer is, says Rav, this case of balon is very unique. Delo machasra mishicha. In other words, in order to be a gozel of Hegdish, which is called a moel, you need to do a kinyan on that which belongs to Hegdish. And we're holding now, like Reish Lakish, that you need a kinyan mashicha. What's unique about the case of balon is that the me'ilah is generated without mashicha. And why is that so? Because the bather is acquiring an abstract right to use the bathhouse. He's not making a kinyan on the bathhouse. So it could be any other case of a payment. You have to make a Mashicha in order to be chayev as a moel, because again, this is Reish Lakish speaking, who holds that there is no kinyan without Mashicha. According to Rabbi Yochanan, any payment would engender me'ilah because any payment would constitute and qualify as a kinyan. Rabbi Yochanan holds v'atorah mos konos. There's no need to specify the balon. And therefore, we specify the balon based on the premise and the principle of Reish Lakish. So with any other payment, until it's Mashicha, there's no Me'ilah, because Me'ilah equals Gzela. But the balon case, because he's acquiring some abstract rights, schuyot, as we call them out in Hebrew, to use the bathhouse, how do you acquire such rights? It can only be by payment. You can't do a Mashiach on abstract rights. And therefore, he's chayav mishum me'ilah even without Mashiach. And that was the chiddush of this price. Gemara asked the question about Tanya. Nisana l'sapar mal. A person takes mos of hegdesh and he pays the barber, the sapar. And the price establishes that he's chayav mishum me'ilah. The sapar haboy lemimshach tispores. If, let's say, the rights of the payer who wants to be groomed have to be established on an object, so that the payment to the barber now clinches some sort of rights to and a commitment on part of the barber to give him a haircut, and for that, for lack of a better term, I'll call him the balabayis. He's got to do a kinyan on the utensils, which he's going to benefit from in the process of getting a haircut, namely the scissors, which is called, in the Gemara's language, tisporis. It's interesting. In modern Hebrew, tisporis is the haircut. But in the Gemara's language, tisporis refers to the scissors. So now the assumption of the Gemara is that the Balabayas never made a kinyan Mashicha on the scissors. And yet, despite that fact, by paying for the haircut, he was now moel behegdish. Must mean that the kinyan was generated by the moels. And the Gemara says, "B'sapar nochri, the lav bar Mashichahu." When the Torah teaches us the kinyan Mashicha, it says miyad amisecha in Vayikra Perek Chafei, and amisecha means your fellow Jew. So there's no such thing as a kinyan Mashicha between a Jew and a non-Jew. So the only way that the Balabayas who's paying for this haircut could be Zocher and Kona and acquire ownership over the scissors of the Sapar, who's a Nochri, who's a Goy, can't be through Mashicha, because Mashicha doesn't operate in such a case. It's got to be through Mos. It's got to be through payment of money. Hence, when the Jew takes Mos of Hegdish and he gives it to the non-Jewish barber, he is in violation of Me'ilah. Tanya Nami Hachi. Now we have a brisa to support this, because we're going to talk about the fact that he gave money over to the barber, and in one case, the brisa is going to say lo mal, and in another case, the brisa is going to say mal. We saw already the first brisa that says mal when he gave over the payment to this non-Jewish barber. because there is no Kinyan Mashiach, but yet here we have a brisa. Take a look. Nisana l'sapar or l'sapana l'kol bali. This whenever you pay up any sort of professional, whether it be a barber, a boatman, a craftsman, so you're paying for services. Lo mal ad demashach. There's no me'ila through the payment of money until you do a mashicha on the object, whether it's the boat, whether it's some sort of craft or the scissors of the barber. Is kashan adoni. We now have two brises that come to exact opposite conclusions. One brisa says he was moel when he paid the money, and the other brisa says he's not moel because he didn't do a mashicha. So when are you moel? By paying a barber. And the more answers, in the case of a sapar nochri, paying up is equivalent to a kinyan. There is no mashicha by a nochri, but most there is. Money speaks loud. But in the case of a Jewish barber, where there is a possibility of mashicha, then the me'il is not clinched until mashicha is implemented. Shmamina. So the Shmamina here is to prove that the original brisa was talking about a sapar nochri, and therefore there's me'ila through payment of mos, even without a kinyan mashiach. Now let's go back to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds midvar Torah mos konos. V'chein Omer Rav Nachman midvar Torah mos konos. So the Gemara now quotes Rav Nachman, who agrees with Rabbi Yochanan, and Levi Masnisin the Ashba. So Levi Bodka means he investigated it, and he came up with a brisa, the Ashkach. And he found a proof for Rabbi Yochanan from a brisa. Apparently, Levi was one of the Bekiyim in brisas. And what does it say in that brisa? Nisana l'siton ma. So money was paid to a siton. Siton is there are massive amount of merchandise, and the siton purchases, it's like, what's that chain called? Okay, well, that's the Merosh for a second. We have these massive amount of produce, and then the smaller guys, we'll call them the retailers, they come along and they buy, from the siton, the wholesalers, with massive amounts. But they can't pay up for all that stuff until they sell it. So they give basically a kind of a down payment for this massive amount of merchandise, and they'll pay up over the course of time. As soon as they sell, they'll ship over some money to pay the siton. So the moment that the siton receives that first payment, that's already mal. Why? Because this brisa reflects the shita Rabbi Yochanan that midvar Torah mos konos.